The men who survived it never forgot the sound. It was not the steady knocking of the machine guns they had trained against. It was one continuous ripping noise, like heavy canvas tearing, like a giant zipper pulled right beside the ear. American soldiers heard it in the hedgerows of Normandy and froze where they stood because the human ear could not pick out the individual shots. There were simply too many. 20 bullets every second. 1,200 rounds a minute. By every rule of engineering, that should have been impossible. A machine gun firing at that rate turns its own barrel into glowing, ruined steel in about 60 seconds. And here's the part most people never learn. The MG42's barrel did exactly that. It overheated, just as physics demanded. So how did German crews keep this weapon firing for hours at a time? The answer was hiding in a small steel latch on the side of the gun, and the men who used that latch paid a horrific price for it. To understand the latch, start with a problem. In 1942, Germany was fighting on multiple fronts, and its standard machine gun, the MG34, was too good for its own good. It was a beautiful piece of machining, carved from solid steel to fine tolerances. It was also a factory manager's nightmare. Around 150 hours of labor and 327 Reichsmarks per gun, at a moment when Germany needed tens of thousands of them fast. So the contract for a replacement went somewhere unexpected, a firm called Grossfuss, which had never designed a weapon in its life. Its specialty was stamped sheet metal. Its lead engineer, Werner Gruner, was an expert in metal pressing, not gunsmithing. That turned out to be exactly the point. The gun his team delivered was punched out of steel sheets, riveted and spot welded together in roughly 75 hours for about 250 Reichsmarks, half the labor and far less scarce material. Inside it sat a roller-locked breech that cycled faster than any standard-issue machine gun of the war. The factories delivered more than 400,000 of them before the war ended, and the German army built its entire infantry squad around this weapon. 10 men, 1 gun. The rifles existed mostly to protect it. Where other armies handed a machine gun to the squad as support, the Germans did the opposite. The squad was the support, and the gun was the point. Everything that follows, the fear, the engineering, the price, grows out of that one decision. Allied soldiers would learn all of that the hard way, but the first thing they learned was the sound. The men who faced it named it before Allied intelligence ever did. American GIs called it Hitler's Buzzsaw for the way it cut through ranks of advancing men. Soviet soldiers called it the linoleum ripper after the tearing noise it made. Orville Sonny Martin, a young lieutenant in the US 13th Armored Division, put it more simply, it sounded like a zipper. That sound did something to soldiers that casualty figures cannot capture. A slower machine gun has a rhythm. The American Browning fired around 500 rounds a minute, and a man pinned behind a wall could count its bursts, feel the pauses, and time his move. The MG42 gave him nothing to count. At 20 rounds a second, the shots blurred into one solid wall of noise, and every burst sounded like it was hunting him personally. Green troops dove into ditches at the first rip of it and stayed there, sometimes for hours, pinned in place by a gun that may have fired for only a few seconds. Veterans learned to keep moving. Replacements often could not. From Normandy to Italy to the Russian steppe, the sound alone did half the weapon's work. A gun does not need to hit anyone to stop an attack. It only needs to convince every man within earshot that the next burst is meant for him. The fear spread so far that the US Army made a training film just to fight it. The film staged a scene with a raw replacement frozen in his foxhole while the narrator admitted the boy can't get over the fast burp of the German gun. Then it ran a shoot-off between American machine guns and the MG42, played down the German gun's accuracy, and delivered its verdict. The German gun is good, but ours is better. Whether any man lying in the mud below a real MG42 believed that is another question. Because the fear was not irrational, it was arithmetic. Against a weapon spitting 20 rounds a second, the odds in the open were exactly as bad as they sounded. But that terrifying sound was hiding a weakness. Every second of the ripping noise pushed the gun closer to destroying itself, and the German engineers had known it from the very first drawing. Every cartridge a machine gun fires is a small, controlled explosion, and much of that heat pours straight into the barrel. At 20 explosions per second, the arithmetic turns brutal very quickly. A single 250-round belt ran through the MG42 in about 10 seconds of continuous fire. 2 or 3 belts, and the barrel began to glow. In the dark, crews could watch their own gun turn dull red along its length. Past that point, horrific things happened. The chamber grew hot enough to set off cartridges by itself, a cook-off where the weapon fires with no one touching the trigger. A machine gun firing itself is every crew's nightmare. Worse, the barrel could warp and sag, and the gun would start throwing bullets wide of everything the gunner aimed at. One account describes a crew dropping a scorching barrel into snow to cool it, then watching it bend because one side cooled faster than the other. Older armies had solved this problem with water, heavy metal jackets full of liquid wrapped around the barrel. Those guns barely overheated, but with the jacket, the water, the tripod, and the crew to haul it all, they were closer to furniture than to infantry weapons. Gruner's team wanted a gun one man could sling over his shoulder and run with. The MG42 weighed about 25 pounds, and a running gun has no room for a water tank, so they could not repeal the laws of physics. Instead, they surrendered to them. If the barrel was going to fail after roughly a minute of full-rate fire, then the barrel would become a disposable part. That was the latch. The gunner's assistant flipped it open, and the breech end of the barrel swung sideways out of the gun. Tilt the weapon, and the glowing barrel slid free into the grass. A fresh barrel dropped in, the latch snapped shut, and the gun was back in the fight. A trained crew did the whole exchange in 6 to 8 seconds, under 10, even in bad conditions. Every gun team carried 2 or 3 spare barrels and a heat-resistant asbestos glove, and they rotated barrels the way a pit crew rotates tires. The discarded barrel lay hissing in the grass or the snow until it cooled, then went back into the rotation, scorched, blackened, but serviceable. Nothing was wasted except the seconds. German doctrine made the rhythm official. The manual ordered a barrel change after about 250 rounds of rapid fire and forbade firing any longer bursts than that. Held to short, disciplined bursts, the gun could sustain perhaps 300 to 350 rounds a minute for as long as the ammunition lasted, which, as the crews discovered, was never long enough. Captured German gunners later told Allied interrogators that a barrel could stretch to 400 rounds if it had to. The manual said otherwise. In combat, the manual usually lost. So here's the truth behind the legend. The MG42 never fired 1,200 rounds through one barrel without melting it. It fired them through a relay of barrels, and none of them was allowed to stay in the fight for much more than 60 seconds of trigger time. The gun did not beat the heat. It changed partners faster than the heat could win. The engineering was elegant. The job of making it work was anything but because the man wearing that asbestos glove knelt beside the most hunted weapon on the battlefield. A German infantry squad was not 10 riflemen with a machine gun attached. It was a machine gun with 9 servants. 3 men crewed the MG42 directly. The gunner, usually a junior NCO, the loader, who fed the belts and swapped the barrels, and an ammunition carrier who hauled extra belts and the spare barrels while watching for targets. The riflemen dug the gun's positions, covered its moves, and crawled forward under fire, dragging cans of ammunition when the fight ran long. They had to. Between them, the entire squad carried about 1,800 rounds for the gun. At the full rate of fire, that is roughly 90 seconds of trigger time. Everything 10 men could carry on their backs, gone in the length of a song. Doctrine demanded discipline, short bursts, ideally around 5 rounds, but the MG42 fired so fast that even a nervous flick of the trigger spat out 5 to 10 rounds. Ammunition drained away like water through open fingers, and the enemy knew exactly where to look. Allied infantry trained on one simple rule: kill the machine gun first. Every mortar crew, every tank gunner, every rifleman with a grenade hunted that muzzle flash. The Germans answered with a tactic called Stellungswechsel. Fire, then move, then fire again from somewhere new. Because a machine gun that stayed in one place was a machine gun with minutes to live. Crews learned to fire a burst, break the gun down, and sprint, dragging barrels and belts through the mud while mortar shells walked toward the position they had just abandoned. The gun's own genius made this worse. It was the most valuable weapon in the squad, so it drew the most fire. Serving it was a promotion and a death sentence in the same breath. When a gunner fell, the loader took the gun. When the loader fell, a rifleman crawled into his place. The gun never stopped being served. Only the names beside it changed. Which leaves the loader. Picture him, pressed flat beside a weapon glowing with heat, counting rounds in his head under a noise like the sky tearing open, knowing that at 250 he has to rise, work the latch, and pull a piece of steel hot enough to warp itself out of the gun, with the glove if he still had the glove. While every enemy in range aimed at the one thing on the battlefield they feared most. The men who did that job and lived often carried burn scars on their hands and forearms for the rest of their lives. Many admitted the sound never left them either. They were haunted by their own gun. So the question from the beginning finally has its answer. How did the MG42 fire 1,200 rounds a minute without melting? It didn't. Not the way the legend claims. Its designers never tried to stop the barrel from overheating because they knew no one could. They accepted the melting as a fact of physics and engineered around it. A disposable barrel, a steel latch, and an 8-second swap that reset the clock again and again, hour after hour. The real cooling system of Hitler's Buzzsaw was never made of steel. It was made of men, a relay of spare barrels, and a young soldier with an asbestos glove running a pit stop under fire. 60 seconds of fury, 8 seconds of nerve, over and over until the belts ran dry. The men who faced the MG42 never forgot the sound. The men who fired it never forgot the heat.